of bookmaker advertising on television and radio. Their chief executive is Michael Dugher, former Labour frontbencher, who joins me now on the line. Michael, good morning.
Good morning.
Just explain the rationale behind the bookmakers voluntarily taking their advertising off most of our screens.
Well, we recognise there have been a number of concerns right at the beginning of this COVID lockdown period, which is why, actually going back to March, we introduced immediately 10 new pledges to make sure that we were responding to those concerns about people being more isolated at home, perhaps bored or anxious or facing financial worries. So they included stepping up safer gambling messages across all platforms, actually, but also in the direct communications that the businesses have with their customers, and monitoring spend and play. And if people are spending more and playing more than perhaps they were, stepping up interventions from and including going all the way to directly intervening and in some cases closing accounts as well. So really this is just the latest measure that we've introduced, and it's about saying in relation to gaming products that we will suspend TV and radio advertising for those. We'll do it as quickly as possible. We don't want to hurt the broadcasters, so where slots have been already agreed, we'll simply replace them with safer gambling messages rather than product advertising. Or we'll donate to charity, or we'll pull those adverts altogether, and it will run until at least early June. So it's really just the latest measure in terms of the industry stepping up to its responsibilities and recognising the public concerns that do exist out there at this time.
I'll come back to the issue of problem gambling and responsibility toward the customer in a few moments' time. I want to talk a little bit about responsibility to the workforce, to the betting shop employees and the staff who are unlikely to be getting back to work anytime soon, and what provisions are being made in terms of the furlough scheme being extended beyond the initial period at the moment to the end of June for those staff who are unlikely to be able to go to work for a long, long time.
Well, we were very involved in close conversations with government around the economic rescue package that resulted with lockdown. We were very pleased with the response, actually, from government. They've engaged very closely with our industry and others. Now, some of the large betting firms have not taken advantage of furlough and are just committed to paying their staff in full for the remaining lockdown period and beyond as well, but many companies have taken advantage of this in the betting industry, as of course they have in other industries as well, and it's been enormously welcome, as has the help with business rates as well. That's not just for high street bookmakers, that's for casinos and other parts of our industry. So as we move beyond this initial lockdown period, we're also talking to the government about how that economic support may continue. If betting shops open, casinos open, you may see an instance where perhaps some staff come back on a part-time basis. Could you get furlough arrangements part-time? I think it's going to be a process, the whole lockdown period, and as we emerge from that very, very gradually, and we'll need to ensure that there is economic support gradually too. But these are conversations that we're very involved in with the government, and they're incredibly receptive to betting industry because they recognise we pay over £3 billion of tax. We employ 70,000 people just in BGC members, and the welfare and the future well-being of our staff is the most important thing to us.
Michael, would you agree that there's a particularly sensitive time for we talked a lot about public perception on this show, the public perception of gambling? If the NHS, as Nigel Lawson once said, is akin to a religion in this country, isn't it true to say that a large portion of the country are being told constantly that gambling is something of the Antichrist?
Well, I think it's a challenge. I think the industry has not always been best in class, and I think the industry has to appreciate that. The BGC that I'm CEO of now is a new body, was launched in November, and it's a new standards body, and our job really is to represent the industry, but also drive big changes through the industry and recognise that we do need to work to have more changes in the industry and to continue to improve standards. I think we're also saying look, we do employ 70,000 people just from BGC members. These are hard-working, decent, tax-paying men and women looking after their families. Betting is something that has always been done. Millions of people enjoy a bet. I think nearly half the country will have a flutter at least once a month. Equally, we recognise that millions of people don't have a bet, and that's okay too. But it is part of our culture. For many people, it adds to their enjoyment of sport, and certainly we make a significant contribution to the country, and we make a significant contribution to sport, not least the great sport of horse racing. So we're looking for a kind of a bit of balance in this debate going forward, recognising the industry has got an awful lot of work to do. And in fairness to the government and to many people, obviously there are a lot of noises around gambling, but I spent a lot of years in politics, a lot of years in government. Actually, I find most people pretty reasonable, and when you actually discuss the evidence in front, I think people take a more constructive approach, and that's certainly what we'll be hoping for as the government moves towards its review of the Gambling Act once we're through this COVID period.
A big challenge, as you say, at a really important time for the betting industry, Michael. Just in terms of the anecdotal evidence that you've received as to how people are coping with this lockdown and whether it is increasing incidents of online problem gambling, what feedback can you give?
Well, I think people did have worries at the beginning, and I recognise people were right to have concerns at the beginning of this period. It's why we acted immediately in increasing safer gambling messages and safer gambling measures. Now, I think, thankfully, because of the way the industry has responded, a lot of the fears that existed a few weeks ago have been proven to be unfounded. That doesn't mean that we need to take our foot off the gas. As you saw with the announcement that we made on TV and radio advertising, we're actually going further. But actually, the truth is, gambling levels have plummeted since the COVID lockdown started. And it's not least because all the betting shops and casinos and bingo halls have closed, so there is no retail gambling at all. People then worried that perhaps you would see sort of mass moves to online gambling. Well, overall gambling revenue for our industry has fallen by 60%. But interestingly, when you look at those figures, online gambling revenue has also dropped by 30%. To put it into context, it's the equivalent of a drop in gambling by British adults of around £100 million a week. So these are pretty tough times for the betting industry. There's no evidence at all that there's been a big spike in online gambling. And I think it reminds people about the fundamental relationship with sport. You know, the real killer here is there's no sport happening at the moment, so there's very little for people to bet on. Now, obviously, there are games, online bingo, and obviously people have the National Lottery and other things. But punters like me who have an occasional bet, you know, often more traditional punters are interested predominantly in horses and football, and that's still the case. And while there's no horses and there's no football, there's not a lot of betting out there. But that, as I say, doesn't mean we've got to take our foot off the gas. We need to absolutely monitor the situation very, very carefully to make sure that people who do enjoy a bet are doing so as safely as possible.
How do you think the BHA are doing, Michael?
Personally, I think they're doing a very, very good job. It's not easy getting the balance right. Clearly, all of us want to see the great sport of racing back. But equally, because it is a great thing for the country. I think you saw that with the Virtual Grand National. What a shot in the arm that was for the country. It'd be fantastic to get racing. We want racing back as soon as possible. Equally, our industry, the sport of racing, has got to live in the real world. And that means being acutely sensitive to the situation, the fact that the country is engaged in an unprecedented national public health emergency. So I know that there's huge amount of work that the BHA are doing with the government and across all of the sport, actually. I think really impressive work to say we want racing back as soon as we can, but we need to make sure when it does come back, it's responsible, it's sustainable, it's as safe as possible. It doesn't put pressure on the NHS. I think it will come back, and I don't think it will be too long, but I think how the BHA have handled it by being very, very sensitive to those important issues has done it enormous credit in recent weeks.
Michael, thank you very much.